Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. Tonight, we step into the terrifying world of true military horror stories. Stories told by soldiers, reconnaissance teams, and special forces operators who encountered something far worse than enemy combatants lurking in the darkness. From isolated forests where unseen voices whisper through the trees, to abandoned barracks haunted by figures in outdated uniforms, to desolate desert outposts where entire patrols vanished without explanation. These first-hand military encounters blur the line between psychological terror and the paranormal. What these men experienced during training exercises and classified operations would follow them long after they escaped the night alive, if they escaped at all. If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. The Whispers in the Forest. The military teaches you how to survive almost anything: extreme weather, sleep deprivation, ambushes, isolation, psychological pressure. You learn how to push fear down until it becomes background noise. By the time I was assigned to Raven Unit, an elite reconnaissance team attached to a joint special operations task force, I thought I had seen every kind of darkness a man could face. I was wrong. This happened in October of 2017 during a training operation somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains near the Romanian border. I won't use the real location. Even now, years later, part of me believes speaking certain details out loud invites something back. There were 8 of us in total, running a 5-day long-range navigation and survival exercise through a heavily wooded section of forest that locals avoided. According to command, the terrain was ideal for concealment and endurance drills: dense pine coverage, deep ravines, limited visibility, no nearby towns for miles, perfect training ground. The first 2 days were uneventful. We moved through the forest conducting recon exercises, practicing silent movement, setting observation posts, and rotating night watch. Standard stuff. The woods were cold and damp, but manageable. At night, the fog rolled low through the trees like smoke drifting across the ground. On the 3rd evening, things changed. We had established a temporary camp near a shallow creek surrounded by enormous black pines. I remember noticing how quiet everything became after sunset. No insects, no owls, no wind moving through the branches. Just silence, the kind that presses against your ears. We were sitting around a low-burning fire checking maps when Dana, our communication specialist, suddenly looked up toward the trees behind us. "Did you hear that?" Nobody answered at first. Then I heard it too, whispering, soft, distant, almost impossible to make out. At first I thought it was wind moving through the forest, but there was rhythm to it, cadence, like several people speaking quietly just beyond sight. One of the guys laughed nervously and blamed exhaustion, but nobody looked convinced. The whispers continued all night. Every time we stopped talking, we could hear them circling beyond the firelight. Sometimes they sounded close enough to understand. Other times they faded into the distance before returning again from another direction entirely. Around 0200, Reeves was standing first watch when he suddenly snapped his rifle toward the tree line. He swore someone was moving between the trees, not an animal, a person, tall, fast, keeping pace with the camp. We searched the perimeter with night vision and thermal optics, but found nothing. No heat signatures, no tracks, nothing except endless rows of dark trees disappearing into the fog. By morning, nobody had slept. The strange part was that the whispers didn't stop after sunrise. As we broke camp and continued the exercise, we kept hearing faint voices drifting through the woods around us. Sometimes they sounded like distant conversations. Other times they sounded familiar, too familiar. At one point, I clearly heard my team leader call my name from somewhere behind me. I turned immediately. Nobody was there. My actual team leader was over 50 yards ahead of me. That was the moment real fear started setting in. We tightened formation and continued moving, but the forest itself began to feel wrong. Distances seemed distorted. Trails vanished behind us. The fog thickened unnaturally fast, even in daylight. More than once I caught movement pacing us through the trees, dark shapes slipping between trunks just outside visual range. That night was worse. Much worse. We established another temporary camp in a narrow clearing surrounded by steep embankments. Nobody spoke much while setting security. You could feel the tension in the air. Hardened operators who had served in combat zones suddenly couldn't stop scanning the darkness. Then the voices started again. Only this time they weren't whispers. They were calling to us, using our names, perfect imitations of our own voices. One voice sounded exactly like Reeves asking for help somewhere deeper in the woods, even though Reeves was sitting 20 feet away from me near the fire. Another sounded like my brother. My brother had been dead for almost 6 years. I remember every muscle in my body locking up when I heard him whisper my name from the darkness beyond the trees. Several guys heard it too. Nobody wanted to admit it. Around midnight, everything exploded into chaos. Mercer, one of our medics, suddenly bolted upright and pointed into the forest. He looked terrified, completely pale. "There's somebody standing out there." We all turned. At first I couldn't see anything. Then the fog shifted. There was a figure between the trees. Tall, motionless, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Its limbs looked too long. Its body seemed to bend unnaturally as if parts of it were moving independently beneath the darkness surrounding it. None of us spoke. The figure just stood there watching us. Then it moved. I've spent years trying to explain what I saw that night, and I still can't. It crossed nearly 30 yards in less than a second without making a sound. One moment it was near the trees. The next it was directly beside Mercer. He screamed once before being dragged violently into the darkness. We opened fire immediately. Muzzle flashes lit up the clearing while shouting erupted everywhere around me, but the forest swallowed Mercer instantly. No crash, no footsteps, nothing, just silence again. Then came the laughter, not human laughter, something deeper, wet, broken, echoing from every direction at once. Panic spread through the team. Training started falling apart. Men who had operated calmly under enemy fire were suddenly backing away from the trees like terrified children. That was when the forest itself seemed to close in around us. The fog thickened until visibility dropped to almost nothing. Shapes moved constantly beyond the white haze. Sometimes I saw faces staring at us between the trees, pale, distorted, smiling too wide. At one point, Dana was lifted off the ground like something invisible had grabbed him around the throat. I watched him slam against a tree hard enough to crack the bark before collapsing unconscious. We tried carrying him while retreating downhill toward our extraction point, but the voices followed us the entire way, mocking us, laughing, imitating us. Every now and then I'd hear footsteps matching my own directly behind me, but whenever I turned around, there was nobody there. We finally broke through the tree line shortly before dawn and reached the outer road where our transport vehicles were waiting. The moment we left the forest, everything stopped. No whispers, no laughter, nothing. Mercer was never found. Officially, the report listed him as missing during a navigation accident. Psychological stress and environmental exposure were blamed for the rest of our claims. We were ordered not to discuss the incident again. Most of the team transferred out within the following year. Some drank heavily afterward. One guy disappeared completely. Another put a gun in his mouth 6 months later after telling his wife he kept hearing voices outside their house every night. As for me, I still dream about that forest. Sometimes I wake up hearing whispers just outside my bedroom window. Sometimes I catch glimpses of dark figures standing between trees while driving at night. And every October, without fail, I hear my brother's voice calling my name from somewhere far away in the dark, waiting for me to answer. The barracks in the woods. Deep in the mountains of Western Virginia, our unit was temporarily assigned to an abandoned military barracks that had been shut down for years after a training facility nearby reopened. Officially, the building was only meant to house us for a week during a field exercise. Unofficially, nobody wanted to stay there. The first thing I noticed when we arrived was the silence. Not normal silence either. It was the kind that felt heavy, the kind that presses against your ears until every small sound feels wrong. The barracks sat isolated at the edge of a dense forest, surrounded by towering pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight even during the afternoon. The building itself looked ancient, with cracked concrete walls, rusted pipes, and long, narrow hallways that smelled like mildew and cold metal. A few of the local contractors helping maintain the training grounds warned us about the place before we moved in. They told stories about soldiers hearing voices at night, seeing figures in old uniforms walking the halls and waking up with scratches they couldn't explain. Of course, we laughed it off. We were infantrymen. Most of us had already deployed overseas. We weren't about to get scared by ghost stories. At least, that's what we told ourselves. The first night was quiet except for the constant creaking of the building settling around us. Every few minutes, pipes somewhere inside the walls would groan loudly enough to make everyone glance up from their bunks. Around midnight, one of the guys in my squad, a private named Carter, sat upright in bed and asked if anyone else had heard whispering. Nobody answered him at first. Then another guy across the room admitted he'd been hearing it too. Soft voices, too faint to make out clearly. It sounded almost like several people talking quietly at the far end of the hallway. Our squad leader, Sergeant Reeves, got irritated and told everyone to stop screwing around and get some sleep. Eventually the room settled down again, but I remember lying awake for hours staring at the ceiling because every time the building went quiet, I could hear it too, whispering, low, constant, like someone trying to speak through clenched teeth. The next night, things got worse. One of the motion lights in the hallway kept flickering on and off even though nobody was out there. At first we thought it was faulty wiring, but then the footsteps started. Slow, heavy footsteps moving back and forth outside our room, back and forth, over and over again. Sergeant Reeves finally got fed up and stormed into the hallway thinking someone was messing around. We all heard the door slam open, then silence. A few seconds later, Reeves came back into the room looking pale. He didn't say anything at first, which immediately felt wrong because this was a man who never looked nervous about anything. Finally, he muttered that he thought he saw someone standing at the far end of the corridor. A soldier, but not one of ours. He described an old military uniform that looked decades out of date, stained dark around the chest and shoulders. The figure had been standing completely still beneath the flickering light. Reeves said the man looked thin, almost sickly, with hollow eyes and skin so pale it barely looked human. And then the hallway light went out. When it came back on a second later, the figure was gone. After that encounter, nobody slept much. The atmosphere inside those barracks changed completely. The temperature would suddenly drop without warning. You could walk from one side of the room to the other and feel pockets of freezing air strong enough to make your breath visible. Radios crackled with static constantly, even after batteries were replaced. Lockers opened on their own during the night. Equipment vanished and reappeared in places nobody remembered leaving it. But the worst thing was the feeling of being watched. It became impossible to ignore. You'd be sitting alone cleaning your rifle or checking gear and suddenly feel eyes on the back of your neck so intensely that you'd turn around expecting someone to be standing there. Usually, nobody was, at least not at first. 3 nights into our stay, I drew perimeter watch around 2 a.m. The forest surrounding the barracks was completely black except for a faint layer of moonlight cutting through the trees. The air was cold and damp, and every sound carried farther than it should have. I remember hearing branches snap deep in the woods, even though there was no wind. About halfway through my patrol, I noticed someone standing near the rear fence line. At first I assumed it was another soldier, but something about the figure immediately felt wrong. He wasn't moving. He just stood there facing me in complete silence. As I got closer, my flashlight passed over him, and my stomach dropped. The uniform looked old, not just worn out. Old. The fabric was torn in several places, and dark stains covered the front of the jacket. His face looked sunken and pale, like something preserved long after it should have been buried. But it was the eyes that froze me in place. They looked empty. Not emotionless. Empty. Like there was nothing human left behind them. The figure slowly began walking toward me. Not running, not speaking, just slow, deliberate steps across the dirt. The temperature around me dropped so fast it felt like all the warmth had been ripped from the air. My flashlight started flickering violently, and that whispering sound returned louder than ever. It surrounded me from every direction, overlapping voices speaking too softly to understand. I tried calling for help over the radio, but all I got back was static. The figure kept getting closer. I remember backing away until my shoulders hit the fence behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then I felt something touch my shoulder. Ice cold. I spun around expecting another soldier, but nobody was there. When I turned back, the figure was inches from my face. I could smell damp earth and rust. For one horrifying second, those hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt this overwhelming wave of grief crash over me. Not fear exactly, something heavier, like despair, like I was feeling the pain of someone who died angry, terrified, and completely alone. Then the flashlight went out, and when it came back on, he was gone. I ran back inside the barracks so fast I nearly knocked the door off its hinges. After that night, everything spiraled. Nobody wanted to be there anymore. Even the toughest men in our unit looked exhausted and shaken. Some claimed they saw figures standing beside their bunks at night. Others heard coughing and distant screaming echoing through empty rooms. One soldier woke up with deep scratches running across his back that hadn't been there before. Less than a week later, command ordered us relocated without explanation. Nobody argued. As we packed our gear and loaded into the trucks, I looked back at the barracks one last time. For just a second, I thought I saw someone standing in one of the second-floor windows, watching us leave. Years have passed since that assignment, but I still think about that place sometimes. I later heard another unit was briefly stationed there after us. According to the rumors, they experienced the same whispers, the same shadows, the same figure wandering the halls at night. The barracks were abandoned again shortly afterward. Officially, there's no record of anything unusual ever happening there. But soldiers talk, stories spread, and some places carry memories that never really die. Even now, whenever I hear distant footsteps in an empty hallway, I think about those hollow eyes staring back at me from the darkness. The Lost Platoon of the Mojave. The desert never feels alive during the day. It feels dead, endless stretches of cracked earth, dry wind, and silence so complete it almost presses against your ears. But at night, the Mojave changes. The darkness out there feels ancient, like something is watching from beyond the dunes, waiting for the sun to disappear. I learned that the hard way. My name isn't important anymore, but back then I was a reconnaissance specialist attached to a Marine platoon stationed deep in the Mojave Desert. We had been tasked with investigating a series of abandoned observation outposts near a restricted training sector. The brass said the locations were being considered for redevelopment, and they wanted updated reports on structural conditions and possible hazards. Routine. At least, that's what we thought. There were 12 of us altogether. Sergeant Cole led the patrol. We rolled out just after sunrise in 2 Humvees, loaded with supplies, communications gear, and enough water to survive the brutal desert heat. The first few hours went exactly how you'd expect. Empty roads, ruined structures, sand blowing across abandoned concrete foundations, nothing unusual. But sometime around late afternoon, things started feeling wrong. It began with the radios. 1 second we were checking in with base normally, and the next, nothing, just static. Every frequency died at the same time. We swapped batteries, checked antennas, even tried emergency channels, but it was like the entire desert had swallowed the signal whole. Sergeant Cole wasn't happy about it, but with darkness approaching, he ordered us to establish a temporary camp near one of the outposts and try again at first light. That night was colder than it should have been. The temperature dropped so sharply, it felt unnatural. The wind disappeared completely, leaving the desert silent. Too silent. No insects, no coyotes, nothing. That's when Harper spotted the lights. At first I thought they were vehicle headlights far off in the distance, but they moved strangely. They drifted above the horizon in slow, unnatural patterns, changing color from pale white to deep orange, then blue. "Tell me you guys are seeing that," Harper whispered. Every one of us was staring at them. The lights hovered for several seconds before slowly moving deeper into the desert, not fast, almost deliberate, like they wanted us to follow. Against my better judgment, I volunteered to join the recon team investigating them. 5 of us headed out on foot while the others stayed behind at camp. The further we walked, the stranger everything became. Distances stopped making sense. The lights always remained just far enough away to keep us moving. Our compasses spun uselessly. GPS units flashed random coordinates before shutting down completely. Then came the feeling, that horrible feeling that someone was nearby, watching us. I remember shining my flashlight across the dunes and catching movement out of the corner of my eye. Shapes standing on the ridges, tall, thin silhouettes that disappeared whenever I looked directly at them. None of us wanted to admit we were scared, but I could hear it in everyone's breathing. Then the lights vanished, just gone. The darkness that followed didn't feel natural. It felt heavy, suffocating, like the night itself had closed around us. We tried heading back toward camp, but nothing looked familiar anymore. The terrain had changed somehow. Dunes where there hadn't been dunes before. Rock formations none of us remembered crossing. It felt like we were walking in circles. That's when Torres started hearing whispers. At first, he claimed someone was calling his name from somewhere beyond the dunes. We told him to ignore it, but then I heard it too. Faint voices carried on the wind, low and distorted, speaking just beyond understanding. The deeper we pushed into the darkness, the worse things became. Our flashlights flickered constantly despite fresh batteries. Harper swore he saw figures moving alongside us. Cole kept stopping suddenly, staring into the distance like he recognized something no one else could see. And then we found the village. It appeared without warning beyond a line of dunes, ancient stone buildings half buried in sand, narrow pathways winding between collapsed walls, strange symbols carved into blackened rock. None of it should have existed out there. The structures looked old, impossibly old, yet somehow untouched by time. No erosion, no decay. It was like the entire place had been frozen beneath the desert for centuries. Every instinct told me we needed to leave immediately, but Sergeant Cole wanted answers. We moved through the ruins carefully, rifles raised, our boots crunching against sand-covered stone. The whispers grew louder the deeper we went. I could feel vibrations beneath the ground, almost like distant humming. Then Harper froze. He pointed toward one of the structures ahead. There was someone standing there. At least, I think it was someone. A tall figure wrapped in dark fabric, motionless beneath a broken archway. Its face was completely hidden, but I could feel it staring directly at us. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and then the figure stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared. That's when panic finally set in. We turned to retreat, but the village no longer looked the same. Pathways twisted in impossible directions. Buildings seemed taller somehow. Every route led us back to the same central courtyard where a massive stone altar stood buried beneath layers of sand. The whispers became deafening. Some of the guys started breaking down completely. Torres dropped his rifle and covered his ears, screaming for the voices to stop. Harper kept insisting there were people surrounding us just beyond the walls. Then everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, the sun was burning overhead. I was lying face down in open desert miles from our original position. Half the platoon was scattered nearby, dehydrated and barely conscious. The village was gone. No ruins, no structures, nothing except endless sand stretching toward the horizon. Search teams found us hours later stumbling near an abandoned service road. Our radios were dead, GPS systems completely fried. Every photo and recording we attempted to take had been corrupted beyond recovery. Back at base, Command blamed everything on heat stroke and mass hallucinations, but they didn't see what we saw. Weeks later, I requested satellite imagery of the area, desperate for proof that the village had been real. There was nothing there, just empty desert, no ruins, no outposts, no sign anyone had ever lived there at all. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.